Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu wa nashhadu anna sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa maulana Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Last week's lesson we made a start on the section of inheritance, mirath, faraid in Islam. And I mentioned that this is a topic where unfortunately a lot of dhulm, a lot of oppression takes place. Even by brothers and sisters who we think to be practicing, who we think to be God-fearing, they also do a bit of dhulm, they also oppress when it comes to this issue of inheritance and mirath. And everybody knows that, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in a hadith, "Az-zulmu zulumatun yawm al-qiyamah," that oppression will be in darkness on the day of judgment. It is mentioned in a hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi that on the day of judgment, a neck will emerge from hell. And this neck, it will have two eyes, it will have two ears, وَلِسَانُ يَنْتِقُ بِهِ, and it will also have a tongue which it will speak with. And this neck will then say to the people on the day of judgment that I have been entrusted to three types of people. And one of them is Jabbarin Anid, a rebellious tyrant, a rebellious zalim. So anyone who is a zalim, anyone who is an oppressor, whether it's oppression through bullying, whether it's oppression through abuse, physical or sexual, whether it's abuse by not giving people their due rights, whatever is their right, whatever is their haqq, whether in terms of miras or inheritance, whether in terms of somebody's done a job or a work for you. Somebody's done a work for you, job for you, and you don't pay him on time, you pay him 2-3 weeks later, or you kind of pay him 2-3 months later, and when you do pay him, you don't give him the full, you just give him 70% or 80%. So anyone who is a zalim or oppressor, they will be in fire of hell. And fire of hell, remember, is not like your any ordinary fire. As mentioned in a hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, that the hellfire was burnt for 1,000 years until it turned red. Then it was burnt for another 1,000 years until it turned white, and then it was burnt for another 1,000 years until it became dark, and at present it is sawda'u muslima, it is black and it is dark. And as I was also explaining before, that the depth of hell is not like a small well where you could throw a bucket or a stone and you could reach the bottom within a matter of seconds. But as mentioned in a hadith, that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was with the companions, when all of a sudden they heard a large thump. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked the companions that, do you know what this large thump was? So the companions, out of respect, said that Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam knows best. So thereafterwards Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained that 70 years ago Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala threw a stone into hell. And as you brothers know, that when you throw something from a high or a tall building, it travels really fast. So this stone has been traveling for 70 years at a very high and fast speed, and 70 years later then it reaches the bottom of hell. So that's how deep hell is. And as mentioned in the Holy Quran, that the dwellers of hell will be given dhari' to eat. Dhari la yusminu wa la yughni min ju'. That it is a thorny plant which will not fatten them, which will not nourish them. It will not suffice them of their hunger. And when they will be given this dhari and other types of fruit which will get stuck in their throats, they will remember that in this world, that whenever they ate something and any food got stuck in their throats, they ate fish, say, and the bones got stuck in their throats, they would remember that actually we would drink a glass of water, and then by drinking the water, the bone will then go down our throat. So what will happen? They will then call out, "Oh, whoever's there, God, whoever, give us a glass of water." So what will happen? They would then be given hot boiling water to drink. And it then goes on to say that when these people of hell will be given hot boiling water to drink, it will burn everything which is inside their body. Their intestines, their bladder, their liver, their kidney, it will burn everything, and it will come out of their backside, and then it will gather underneath their feet. So that is hell. For which types of people? Jabbarin Anid, for those who are zalim and for those who are oppressors. So this is something which is very, very important, that we learn about the rules of miras and inheritance properly. We know exactly who to give. We know what to give, so that on the day of judgment we are not considered to be tyrants, we are not considered to be zalim, and we don't face the torments and the difficulties of hell. Now, the giving of inheritance is not something which is unique or khas with Muslims. In other words, what I'm trying to explain is that the giving of inheritance was something which was practiced before the coming of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So during the days of ignorance, Zamana Jahiliyyah, people would also give inheritance. Whenever someone would pass away, the people would take their inheritance. So it's not something which is unique and khas with Muslims. But the difference was that during the days of ignorance, Zamane Jahiliyyah, only those people who were able to fight, only those people who were able to go for battles, they were only worthy of receiving inheritance. So just say, for example, grown, mature adults, they were only worthy to receive inheritance. Young boys weren't allowed to receive inheritance. Why? Because they're not able to fight. And definitely young girls and women were not allowed to receive inheritance, were deprived of inheritance. Why? Because they didn't go to the battlefield. So it's only young, strong men who were able to fight, they received inheritance. Even to the extent that old men weren't allowed to receive inheritance during the days of ignorance. Why? Because they weren't able to fight. So basically inheritance was just basically for those who were able to fight. Now the first ayat or the first verse to be revealed about inheritance in Islam is a very famous verse in Surah An-Nisa. Begins with Yusikumullahu fi awladikum. And that was the very first verse to be revealed about inheritance, about taqseem, about distribution of people's wealth. And just very quickly, the background to this particular ayat being revealed, there was a companion in the name of Sa'd bin Rabi radhiyallahu anhu. And Sa'd bin Rabi radhiyallahu anhu was martyred during the Battle of Uhud. Was one of those 70 shuhada, 70 martyrs of Uhud, as was foretold by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam the previous year during the Battle of Badr, when the Sahabas took ransom for the 70 prisoners of Makkah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told them that if you do take the ransom, remember the following year 70 of you, i.e. 70 of the Sahabas, would lose their life. So the following year, i.e. during the Battle of Uhud, 3rd Hijri, 70 Sahabas lost their lives. One of them was Hazrat Sa'd bin Rabi radhiyallahu anhu. Now when he passed away, Sa'd bin Rabi radhiyallahu anhu, he had 2 daughters and he had a wife. Now, according to the practice of the Arabs and Zamani Jahiliyyah, women, daughters, wives did not receive any inheritance. So what happened was Sa'd bin Rabi radhiyallahu anhu's brother, i.e. the uncles of the daughters, came and took his entire estate. So his property, his land, everything the uncle took. So Sa'd bin Rabi radhiyallahu anhu's wife came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and complained that the uncle, i.e. the daughter's uncle, has taken all the property. How am I going to look after the daughters? How am I going to look after myself? How can I get these daughters married, because we don't have a single penny to live on? So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam waited, and then this ayat mubarakah was revealed. Yusikumullahu fi awladikum lizzakari mislu hadzil unsayayn. And that was the very first ayat to be revealed about inheritance, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered from now on women will get a right in the inheritance. Before, for how many years, only Allah knows best, thousands of years, there was no inheritance for women. Women did not receive a single penny from inheritance. But that was the very first ayat to be revealed, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that wives will receive inheritance, daughters will also receive inheritance as well. So that was the very first ayat and verse to be revealed about inheritance, the story of Hazrat Sa'd bin Rabi radhiyallahu anhu. Now the next point which I'm going to mention about inheritance is that when somebody passes away, I'm just going to mention how very briefly his wealth is distributed. We'll look at it in a bit more detail inshallah next week. How very briefly his wealth is distributed. And also at the same time I'm going to mention that those people who are barred or who are prohibited from receiving inheritance. And then lastly I mention a particular objection people have about the Islamic way of distributing inheritance and mirath. Now it's mentioned in the books of fiqh, in the books of hadith in particular, that whenever somebody passes away, firstly from his inheritance, his burial expenses will be covered. So somebody passed away and he leaves behind, say, £10,000. Instead of somebody else taking that money or using that money, first and foremost, his burial expenses would be covered from the money which he has left over. Thereafterwards, after his burial expenses have been paid, the next thing you will use his inheritance and mirath for will be for his debts. So any kind of debts which he has outstanding, he borrowed or he lent, or he borrowed, say, from Abdul Rahman £1,000, or from Abdul Rahim £600, or from this particular brother or from this particular sister, he took some money. So what will happen is that from his inheritance, the debts and the qarz will be paid. Now when we talk about debt here, we refer to the debt of the people. Daynul ibad, i.e. the debt of the people. So in other words, if he has debt of Allah, and what I mean by debt of Allah, in other words, if he's got outstanding prayers, or like for example he hadn't fasted, and the fidya for those fasts, the compensation for those fasts, or just say for example if he haven't been given zakat for many years, so the outstanding zakat, they would not be given from the inheritance money. And I'll talk about that inshallah later, that a person who's got outstanding zakat, outstanding sadaqat, kafaras, expiation, outstanding prayers, the fidya and the compensation for that, how does he pay it off, in particular if he's passed away, and who will pay it off? Does he pay it off? Does he go through his inheritance? Inshallah we'll touch on it some other time. But what I'm trying to say is that firstly, from his inheritance, the burial expenses will be used. Thereafterwards, the next part of his inheritance will be used for his debts. Now just say for argument's sake, that person had £10,000 savings when he passed away. And after paying off his debts and after paying off his burial expenses, you've got £6,000 remaining. So So basically £4,000 went on burial and also his debts as well. So you've got £6,000 remaining. Then afterwards, do you know, from the £6,000, in 1/3, or in other words, in £2,000, his bequests, i.e. his wills, will be given. So in other words, before he passed away, if he made a will or a bequest that give this much amount of money to a madrasa, or give this much amount of money to so and so, or give this much amount of money to a masjid, it will only be valid up to 1/3 of the remaining estate. So if he, after his burial expenses, had £6,000 remaining, so basically within £2,000, his burial, his bequests and his wills and any kind of intentions he made of, this much amount of money to a madrasa, or this much amount of money to a mosque or to a maktab and so on, will only be established up to 1/3 of the remaining estates. Now I've given an example, like he had £6,000 remaining and only 1/3, i.e. £2,000 will be set aside for bequest. Now just say, you may be thinking, if he made a vow or he made a bequest that I want to give a madrasa £10,000, but there's only £2,000 remaining. So what will happen is that you won't be able to give 10,000, but you'll have to lower it down up to the 2,000 mark. So basically it has to be within the 1/3 of the remaining inheritance. If he made bequests of anything more than that, then it's not going to be fulfilled, it's not going to be valid. You have to level it down, you have to bring it down up to the 2,000 mark, i.e. up to 1/3 of the remaining estate of the inheritance. Now I'm just going to mention one or two things about bequest here. In Islam, making a will or making a bequest is actually mustahab. It's not something necessary, it's not something farz, it's not something obligatory, it's something which is good. But in this day and age, or in particular in this country, in the UK, whereas all of you know that UK inheritance law is not compatible with Islamic Sharia inheritance law. In other words, what happens is that when somebody passes away in this country, then his estate will be distributed according to the law of this country. Which in other words means that your wife, if you were to pass away first, your wife, your children will take it. But if you have parents, they won't take anything. If you have brothers or sisters, they don't receive anything. So what happens is that when you pass away, your wealth, your estate, your land, your property will be distributed, but un-Islamically. Also, if you have a lot of money, then 40%, if say for example your entire estate is over or is worth more than £320,000, then 40% will be taken from there as inheritance tax. So that 40%, which should have gone to your children, which should have gone to your parents if they were alive, which should have gone to your spouse, 40% is going to the government. So when you look at it, these two things actually is totally against the Sharia. And because it's against the Sharia, then what could happen is that that person, as mentioned in the hadith of Ibn Majah, that as mentioned in the hadith, very similar wordings I'm giving, like basically there's a man and a woman, they do ibadat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but before they pass away, they do darar. Darar means that they give nuqsan, they give harm to someone in the inheritance, because of which they go to hellfire. So basically what I'm trying to say is that we living in this country, when we pass away and we don't do anything before to get it distributed Islamically, and then the property is distributed un-Islamically, it is distributed, say for example 40% going to the government, then we are actually following that hadith in a way that our entire life we spent in ibadat, worship, namaz and so on and so forth. But then before we passed away, we do a bit of zulm, jiski wajah se we then end up in hell. So now the way around it in this country is by drawing up an Islamic will. Drawing up an Islamic will. That's why ulamas have said that in this country in particular, drawing up an Islamic will is wajib, it's obligatory. Not mustahab. If it was an Islamic state, yeah, fair enough, it's mustahab. Because what happens in an Islamic state, when you pass away, the Amirul Mu'mineen, the government, the Islamic government, they'll distribute your property for you Islamically. In this country, no one's going to do it Islamically for you. So the way you can protect your property and you can make sure, yeah, that it's being done Islamically is that you draw up an Islamic will. And in this will, obviously there are many solicitors, many firms now, they have these Islamic wills. You could also download them online as well from various places, from various organizations. So basically in the Islamic will, what happens is that you kind of stipulate that when I pass away, I want my inheritance to be distributed Islamically. But so then what will happen is that you probably name a scholar or an imam or someone on that will, and it will be his responsibility to then distribute that inheritance Islamically. And by you having that will, you also at the same time save yourself from the inheritance tax as well. You save yourself from inheritance tax. So this is because of these two reasons that you're saving yourself from inheritance tax, and also at the same time you get your property distributed Islamically. That's why it is very, very important that we obviously draw out a will, make a will. And it's something which is very, very simple to do. You could, as I said, that you could download the Islamic wills online. And you just obviously fill it in, sign it, and the signature bus has to be witnessed by two people. Two people. And then their names there. And those who witnessed it, their signature has to be attested by two people as well. But that's it. It's very, very simple. You don't even have to go to a solicitor to do it in front of him. Obviously, probably it may be good if you have a lot of wealth and so on that you probably do speak to a solicitor. But if it's like, say, koi aam banda who probably doesn't have that much, just basics and so on, then it's very important that whatever you have, just do a Islamic will, get that signed, and have witnesses there who have noticed or who have witnessed you doing the Islamic will. So jiski wajah se, what will happen is that when you do pass away, then you don't end up doing a sin or doing something zulm before you leave this world. As mentioned in the hadith, innamal a'malu bil khawatib. What does that hadith mean? It means that actions are based on your endings. What does that mean? It means that if you left this world doing something good, inshallah in the hereafter you'll be raised in a good way, in a good state. If you left this world, say for example, prostrating in the Baytullah, in the Kaaba, or in Masjid al-Nabawi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then inshallah when you'll be raised in the hereafter, you'll be raised in that particular way. However, may Allah forbid that if we leave this world listening to music, if we leave this world committing zina, if we leave this world intoxicated via drugs or alcohol, then may Allah forbid we'll be resurrected in that particular way. So if we leave this world committing zulm, if we leave this world committing oppression, then may Allah forbid we may be raised in that particular way in the hereafter. So going back to what I was mentioning, inshallah I'll touch on it again in a bit more detail because there's a separate section about wills and wasiyah in this particular book. But as I was saying, that whatever is left over in 1/3 of your property, the 1/3 of your property will be used for bequest. And then whatever is left over, so the 2/3 which is left over, will then be distributed amongst your heirs and your wuratha. Will be distributed amongst your heirs and your wuratha. And inshallah, next week we'll look at it in a bit more detail, who are the heirs and who are the wuratha. Now the next point which I want to mention here is those people, now what types of people are barred or are prohibited from receiving inheritance. Now, there are two types of people who are barred from receiving inheritance, which applies in this day and age. Number one is killing, and number two is kufr, i.e. disbelief. Now, what I mean by that is, just say for example, if a son, again may Allah forbid that, if a son kills his father. Why did he kill him? Intentionally killed him. Why? For his inheritance. Like sometimes you hear cases where children, they kill their parents. Why? So that they could have all the wealth. So just say if a son killed his father or his mother with the intention of inheritance, then the rule or the masla is that that son now would not receive his father's inheritance. That son would not receive his mother's inheritance. Or just say for example there were two brothers. One of the brothers was rich. So the other brother thought that, let me kill my brother so that I could take, say, half of his inheritance, or I could take some portion of his inheritance. So what does he do? He kills his brother. So again, in that situation, there will be no inheritance between the two. So what I'm trying to say is that where there is murder or homicide, and it was done with that intention of inheritance, like intentional killing for inheritance, then in that situation, that person would not receive inheritance from you. And also another scenario where there is no inheritance is if the person who you are inheriting from happens to be of a religion other than yours. Or in other words, happens to be a non-believer. Now obviously this normally will happen, say, with reverts, where sometimes reverts, converts, their father passes away, or their mother passes away, and their father or mother may have been a millionaire, was very, very rich. So in that situation, they would not be allowed to receive a single penny from their father. They would not be allowed to receive a single penny from their mother. Why? Because, as I just explained, that kufr or non-beliefs, or to inherit from someone who happens to be of a religion or a faith other than yours, you cannot inherit from that person. So just say if somebody's brother passes away and he happens to be a non-Muslim, you can't inherit from him. If your uncle was to pass away and he happens to be a non-Muslim, then again you can't take miras, you can't take inheritance from him. So these are the two people who are barred from receiving inheritance. But besides that, I'm just going to give some other examples. Besides that, such as nafarmani, that is not a cause to bar someone from receiving inheritance. Now what I mean by that, sometimes there was a brother once, brother meaning like an old person, a father. He was telling me a situation that something happened with his son, and his son left home. There were some issues, his son left home, so he's very, very bitter. So he was saying that, my son, I'm not going to give him not a single penny from the inheritance. Now the rule is that irrespective of sons, children, how nafarman, how disobedient, how disrespectful they may have been in their life, that is not a cause for them to be stopped or barred from receiving inheritance. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that even though there may have been a son who kind of like disobeyed his father, disrespected his father, was proper nafarman to his father, even then, if the father was to pass away, the son has a share of the inheritance. Even though the father may have written in his will that I don't want my son to take anything, even then the son has a share of the inheritance. Another example I'll give, just say for example, if someone happens to be badkar, i.e. a zani, a fornicator, even then they are not barred from the inheritance. So what I mean by that is, just say for example, a wife, she has a husband, but her husband's been, say for example, involved in other women, involved in adultery, fornication. So if the wife was to pass away, the husband will still get a share from his wife's inheritance, even though he was a zani, even though he was badkar, or even vice versa, that if the wife has been committing zina and adultery and the husband passed away, the wife would also receive a share. Why? Because she's got a right to receive a share, even though she may have been badkar, even though she may have been a fornicator or an adulterer. Okay, and some other examples as well, that nabalig children, immature children, they are also not prohibited or barred from receiving inheritance. So to say if a father was to pass away and he's left behind a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, that 6-year-old son receives a share equivalent to that of a 25-year-old son. Because what happens unfortunately in some cultures is that the eldest son, because he's old, they say, oh no, we'll give him more. And the nabalig one, 5, 6-year-old, we just give him, say, half of what the eldest son gets. No, that's wrong, that's zulm. So whether the son, the eldest one happens to be 25 or happens to be 30 and the youngest one happens to be 6, 7-year-old, the same amount of money the eldest son is getting, the exact same amount of money the nabalig child will also get as well. So remember, being nabalig, being a sinner, being a badkar or a zani or a zaniya, that doesn't stop a person from receiving inheritance. Now let's very quickly finish off just today's lesson by a very famous objection which a lot of people have when it comes to Islamic inheritance. And the objection is that it is mentioned in the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ هَذِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, which means that a male or a man, when it comes to inheritance, he receives double than what the woman gets. So just an example, if a man was to be receiving 60 pounds, the woman will only get 30. So in other words, when it comes to inheritance, man gets double than that what the woman gets. So obviously a lot of people, non-Muslims in particular, when they read this particular verse, when they hear about Islamic inheritance law, they say, well, there's no equality here, there's no barabari, sarabari between men and women. Now, as I already explained before, that in Islam, there's no such thing as equality in Islam. There's no equality in Islam. There's justice in Islam, but there's no equality. Because what does equality mean? Equality means that everyone is barabar sarabar. And Islam never says everyone is barabar sarabar. Because if that was the case, then the same way men are leading prayers, women should also lead prayers as well. The same way men do adhan, women should also give adhan. The same way men give iqamat, women should also give iqamat. So remember, Islam is not a religion of equality, it's a religion of justice. And what does justice mean? Justice means that Islam recognizes that men are stronger, women are weaker. And accordingly, Islam gives roles and responsibilities to a man befitting his strength, and roles and responsibilities to women befitting her strength, which is more emotion side, looking after children, tenderness, care, modesty, wagera, wagera. Whereas for other chores, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given it to men. Why? Because men are more strong, men are able to do that. So as I was saying, that Islam is not a religion based on equality, it's based on justice. Now because Islam is based on justice, when we look through the Holy Quran and just in Sharia in general, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made men responsible of many, many financial duties. Many, many financial duties. Men have to provide, a husband has to provide, and not women. Now what I mean by that, man and woman, when they get married, it's the husband's responsibility to provide for accommodation, to provide for food, to provide for clothing of his wife, the bills, the rent. Whose zimmedari, whose responsibility it is? It's the husband's. Whereas when it comes to the wife, if a wife, say for example, is working, whatever she earns, it's her own exclusive haqq. Obviously if she wants to chip in for the rent and bill, that's her own accord, her own will. But whatever she earns is exclusively hers. Whereas when it comes to men, the Sharia says that no, whatever you earn, you have to give it to your wife. If you have mothers or sisters who are in need, you have to give it to them. Also on top of that, when a woman is divorced, again the Sharia says that up to the end of her iddah and waiting period, you need to provide for her. You need to support her. So now keep this in mind, Islam is based on justice. Now when we look at it, Islam has made so many financial responsibilities on men, that men have to provide for their wives. Even when he divorces her, he still has to provide for her. He has to provide for his children, bills of the house, rent of the house. The man has to provide. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his infinite wisdom decided that whenever there's inheritance, because men are plowing more finance into their duties, when there's inheritance, they should have a haqq and a right to receive double than what a woman is getting. Double than what a woman is getting. Because if Islam said no, inheritance has to be equal, that would have been zulm there for men. Because men are providing everything, but when it comes to inheritance, no, they're going to get the same as women. That's going to be zulm. Whereas women, when they are not providing anything, they have no financial duties, and then in inheritance they get the exact same as men, that's going to be zulm by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not do zulm on anyone. So subhanAllah, it's the beauty of our deen, our religion, and in particular Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's infinite wisdom, that the rules he gives, subhanAllah, is all bara hua hai with insaf, with adl. Because that's what Islam is a religion of justice. That's who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. He is someone who gives and administrates justice. And that's why in the hereafter, no one, whether it's a believer, disbeliever, Allah kisi ke saath zulm nahi karenge. Because why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just and he administrates justice. Their sharia is based on justice. Even in the hereafter, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also administrate justice as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act on what's been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah.